Franchises have given Hollywood some of its greatest successes, but also its most memorable failures, like 2006's Eragon. The film was based on the first novel in the Inheritance cycle by Christopher Paolini, who famously wrote the book as a teenager. While the novel was sometimes criticized for its overly familiar plot, it was an earnestly told story that sold millions. And in the fantasy adaptation craze of the 2000s, with a cast that included Jeremy Irons and John Malkovich, this story of a boy and his dragon seemed poised to, well, take flight. But it didn't. While readers had resonated with Paolini's archetypal but heartfelt story, the film made significant changes that frustrated fans and didn't stop critics from still accusing it of being derivative. I still remember in interviews before the release, even Paolini himself could only offer very vague praise. So despite an okay international performance, the hope for launching a multi-film series quickly flamed out, cementing Eragon as one of Hollywood's failed franchises. And we'll quickly pause here to say that for our purposes, a failed franchise is simply one that was cancelled before it reached its intended conclusion. It doesn't necessarily mean that the movies aren't good, and it definitely doesn't mean that the filmmakers aren't talented. After all, just look at John Carter. Based on the seminal science fiction novels by Edgar Rice Burroughs about a Civil War soldier who is mysteriously transported to Mars, Disney hoped their 2012 film would be the start of a major sci-fi franchise. The title role was given to Taylor Kitsch, who was known for playing Tim Riggins on Friday Night Lights. Starring in Battleship the same year, Kitsch seemed poised to leap into leading man status. Unfortunately, Kitsch was simply too ugly. That is a joke, because he's a very handsome man. Despite his considerable talent, John Carter wouldn't launch Kitsch's A-list career because it wound up being the biggest box office bomb of all time. Unlike some movies on this list, John Carter is actually pretty fun. Not perfect, but far from deserving to be history's biggest flop. So what happened? Well, a few things. While the novels had inspired countless sci-fi epics, including Star Wars, by the time the John Carter movie was released, the material ironically felt derivative of the very works it had originally influenced. Director Andrew Stanton, who had made brilliant animated films, struggled with his transition to live action, which led to costly reshoots that added to the budget. An article in The New Yorker about the film's production troubles released the year before the movie also put a dark cloud over the project. The marketing didn't capture the film's unique appeal, mixed reviews didn't help, but whatever the case, John Carter quickly vanished, something that would sound familiar to the lead in our next franchise. Jumper landed in theaters in 2008, based on the novel by Stephen Gould, and was marketed as the start of a new sci-fi franchise. Starring Hayden Christensen, who had seemingly wrapped up his work as Anakin Skywalker 3 years earlier, the film followed a young man who could teleport anywhere in the world. Unlike many films that failed to launch franchises, Jumper was a relative box office success, earning $225 million on an $85 million budget. So why didn't the planned trilogy happen? While the movie was profitable, it wasn't enough to justify continued investment when coupled with the negative response from critics and audiences. As Tom from the wonderful YouTube channel Eisenhart Productions highlighted in his fantastic video on Jumper, the movie didn't quite work. The plot and pacing were uneven, too slow in some places and way too fast in others. Another major issue was the creative challenge of balancing the teleportation powers. The abilities were so OP that the writers had to force Christensen's character into illogical decisions to create conflict. Although there was a short-lived semi-sequel YouTube Red series nearly a decade later, Jumper remained the defining example of a sci-fi adaptation with young adult appeal that never quite took off. Until, that is, I Am Number 4. Released in 2011, I Am Number 4 landed in a strange transitional YA space. Not the supernatural wonder of Harry Potter, but also lacking the dystopian grit of films like Hunger Games and Divergent that would soon dominate the genre. The book was the creation of James Fry, writing under the pseudonym Pittacus Lore. Fry had been embroiled in some controversy after fabricating parts of his memoir, A Million Little Pieces, but the film rights for the Lore and Legacies novels were snapped up before the first book had even been finished, and the commercial potential of the project was clear. According to Fry, Steven Spielberg himself urged him to add extra details about how certain weapons would look so that they could sell them as toys. The film tells the story of a teenage alien hiding among humanity as he battles other aliens on Earth. Director DJ Caruso had previously done solid work in high-concept teen suspense. His Disturbia was a solid, if somewhat forgettable, 2000s take on Rear Window. And I Am Number 4 is competently made, but not much more than that. During a recent rewatch for this video, I actually had trouble staying awake at parts. Although I do have a newborn baby, so maybe that's part of it too. Maybe the best way to describe it is that it sort of feels like a straight-to-Netflix movie before that was really a thing. So while the movie wasn't a total box office flop, it was panned by critics and didn't perform well enough to justify the 9 planned sequels. I actually have an interesting personal connection to the Pittacus Lore pseudonym and a story about Fry that I might share in a future video. If you're interested, let me know. But for now, we've got 4 more franchises to cover, including the last one YA adaptation, Percy Jackson. When Chris Columbus, who had helmed the first two Harry Potter movies, signed on to adapt the first Percy Jackson novel, it seemed like the next big film franchise had arrived, but despite the title, it would not be lightning in a bottle. Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief hit theaters in 2010, loosely adapting the book's plot about a demigod teenager and his adventures with other figures from Greek mythology. But unlike the Potter adaptations, the film was criticized for failing to capture the tone and spirit of the source material. One major issue was aging the characters from middle schoolers to high schoolers, which really alienated the book's core fan base. The movie did financially okay, enough to justify a sequel, Sea of Monsters, 3 years later, but that one fared even worse, and the plan to adapt the entire series fizzled out, to the relief of Rick Riordan, the author of the books, who famously hated the films. Thankfully, the books would eventually get the adaptation they deserve with a Disney Plus series reboot, going from hated movie to beloved TV show, the opposite of what happened with The Last Airbender. M. Night Shyamalan's adaptation of the beloved animated series Avatar: The Last Airbender was retitled to avoid confusion with James Cameron's Avatar, which had just become the highest-grossing movie of all time, and that was just the first of many changes that upset fans of the massively popular source material. Even Shyamalan fans can admit he's had an up-and-down career, and this movie arrived during a particularly rough patch, sandwiched between The Happening and After Earth. Although he was a self-described fan of the animated series, Shyamalan made several bewildering changes that alienated the fan base, altering lore, character names, and casting white actors in non-white roles. So while using movie business math, the film was likely profitable, the overwhelmingly negative reviews and fan backlash ensured that plans for a trilogy were scrapped. Like the director himself, the Avatar franchise would find its footing again, as would Ryan Reynolds, the star of our next failed franchise. Green Lantern hit theaters in 2011, just as the Marvel Cinematic Universe was finding its world-dominating stride. Unfortunately for DC, this film became a prime example of the brand not knowing how to handle its characters in a rapidly evolving superhero landscape. Ryan Reynolds is fine as Hal Jordan, a cocky test pilot who inherits a mystical green ring that gives him superpowers, but not much else about the movie works. The script is pretty flat, and the movie is overloaded with early 2010 CGI, including Reynolds' infamous animated suit. But the bigger issue may have been that, as much as many comic fans love Green Lantern, he just wasn't quite a big enough name for a so-so depiction to kickstart a franchise, particularly as the MCU was bringing its characters together in such an innovative, interconnected way. And it was a box office catastrophe that lost the studio a reported $75 million. But even if it didn't light the way toward building a shared cinematic world, it still wasn't the darkest of the failed franchise universe. The Dark Universe was an ambitious attempt to revive the classic Universal monster properties. The studio trumpeted the arrival of a shared universe before even releasing a single film, with The Mummy meant to be its blockbuster launch. The 2017 film starred Tom Cruise and updated the classic horror film, or at least the idea of it, with a heavy emphasis on action and supernatural elements. Unfortunately, The Mummy stumbled under bloated set pieces, awkward humor, and a tone that failed to capture the suspense, horror, and wonder of the original film. The movie's infamous Scream trailer, which featured an unedited version of Cruise's mid-air scream, went viral for all the wrong reasons. Despite grossing $410 million worldwide, the movie underperformed, especially given its $195 million budget and higher expectations. The failure of The Mummy caused the studio to shelve the rest of its planned Dark Universe movies. Although the films crumbled, Universal's classic monsters will rise again, this time with their own world at the Epic Universe theme park set to open in 2025. No, Universal is not a sponsor, but I would love for them to be. So those are some franchises that could have been great. Here are some videos about great directors' worst movies, and if you'd like another video in this franchise series, please let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.